everyone, this is Arabella from Arabella's Voice Studio, back for another episode of Piano for the Vocalist. This time I'm joined by Florie Namir, and I have to say I'm very excited for this episode because this is my favorite way to connect with people. 2 episodes ago, or one that we aired last time was with Dr. Hubert Ho, and I finished recording with Dr. Ho, and he said, I have this great person that you have to meet to connect with to do the podcast. And that is my absolute favorite way to meet musicians. My favorite way to connect with others is through someone else that I already know, and the network just keeps growing. So without further ado, Florie, will you just tell us a little bit about who you are as a person and as a musician?
Yes, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Arabella. This is really nice to talk to you today. And thanks, Hubert, for connecting us as well. So I'm a jazz pop singer-songwriter, and I'm a classical composer in training. I've got a PhD in composition and theory. In recent years, I'm more of a singer-songwriter. I lived about 13 years in the US, and then I moved to London right before the pandemic started. So I was able to do a couple of little things. Then everything stood still for a little bit and tried to find creative ways to continue doing music online. Now I'm performing in London, writing some music, collaborating currently with someone from Paris. And that's in general my background.
Something that struck me that you said is you composed and performed music, worked with musicians all over the world here. Does it elicit a different feeling depending where you are, what country you're in, what you're working on?
Yes and no. There is a sort of excitement to kind of learn about each other. But the way musicians work or approach music, I find similar in different places. The passion is the same. Probably the education is similar. And I think what connects people, and it kind of ties to what you've said at the beginning, is doing music and the passion for it. And when you reach a new place, when I played, for example, in Mexico City with 3 other musicians, it just felt like we knew each other for ages because we were just doing something that we were excited about.
They say that music's the universal language, right? That no matter where you are, you can speak it with different people. When I was listening to your music and reading some of the interviews here, you had this really interesting section on your website in your bio, and it says Florie's songs are anchored in real life events. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because sometimes I think we struggle as songwriters to separate the minutia, right, of our lives into something bigger. And you spoke to the fact that you were performing in all these places, writing songs in all these places. So I imagine that you have just a lot of inspiration to pull from. How do you draw the line of what makes a really great song and what's just the details?
I find that just living life creates a lot of material as it is. And I'm not a particularly dramatic person or something like that. I think other people may be more eccentric or have more exciting life than mine. But I think there is enough material there in your own life to provide some kind of interest that will speak to other people. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the experience that you go through, some other people will go through. And I think it's not necessarily about drawing the line between life and art, for me, it's more about connecting them, because I feel like it's more authentic when I speak about something that I know from experience. If I'm going to write about some other people's life, maybe imagine how they live. I could do that as well, but I need to find my voice in that experience. It's kind of similar to what maybe an actor goes through when they prepare for a role. They're trying to find themselves emotionally, connect to the role that they're going to play.
Yeah,
So in that sense, you want to have that connection, and yeah, that's my way to kind of connect the art and life. Mhm.
I really like it. And I, from a teaching perspective, tell my students you can't separate mind, body, voice. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about, right? The singer's journey in lessons is going to show up in real life, and in real life is going to show up in the studio. And I separate it into real life in that, the studio is such a microcosm environment. So, in some ways, to your point, we want to blur those lines a little bit. You don't want to just show up in lessons and I will sing now or I will play piano now. We really want to embrace what's happening in the outside world is definitely going to make its way in. And I think, at least in my experience, what happens in this little bubble in the studio has made its way back into my world in the outside as well.
Definitely, it kind of feeds each other, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about the human experience and how we live, and we don't necessarily want to disconnect things, otherwise they're kind of sterile, and we want to make them more organic, I think.
Yeah, and you have teaching experience as well. And what I found really interesting, and Dr. Ho had a little bit of this too, is you taught theory and composition, these classes to non music majors, which I'm always fascinated by because, firstly, I was a music minor in college for listeners, and I've studied music my whole life, but it wasn't my major. It wasn't until after college that I was like, this is the path for me. So that discovery period, I think, is oh so important for two reasons. One, it might turn you on to the musical journey, or you might say, well, I really love it, but it's not my main profession, but I can still take these classes. Can you speak a little to that?
Yes, so many of the students in different institutions around Boston, when I taught at Brandeis University, at Harvard, at MIT, most of the students were not music majors, and sometimes not even music minors. And I found that some students came with extensive background in music. And that just goes to show how music can be a big part of someone's life without needing to, be a professional in music. Some of my very best students were not music minors, even. I had one particular student that I gave them a task during the class, and they have really practiced hard, very hard during the week. And the following week, they just mastered what I gave them. They had never studied piano ever. And that was a kind of a keyboard lesson, a group lesson. So in that 10 minutes that I gave, feedback, they really took it and practiced and to improve their skills. And I think that goes to show how self-discipline, that is so important in music, is something that you can use in anything that you do. And I'm sure that person also applies that in their own. I think they were computer science majors or something like that. I'm sure they apply it as well. their discipline.
Yeah, something that struck me there, you said 10 minutes of instruction time. Just 10 minutes. And I think
10
that's
minutes,
so
yes.
important because often we frame things in a half an hour setting. But I always return to in that hour, we should really be having mini lessons because, to your point, it doesn't take a full hour to explain that one concept. And if it is taking you that 1 hour to explain a full concept from the teaching perspective, it's either a really in depth conversation or we need to relook at how we're redistributing our time because sometimes I think we can get in the way of, wow, I really love this, so I'm going to talk about it. When the student can be self-disciplined themselves to go on their own discovery path.
Definitely, yeah. Because you're just giving a principle, you're showing something. But a lot of that work is about the student experimenting, exploring, discovering what they can do. And that's the magic of it. It's not like you need to provide all the answers. And I don't think any teacher should have the role of, I know everything. Here, this is take what I know. It's about what the student needs and the student development, right? So you providing some kind of a seed and you want the student to grow that seed into something beautiful.
This episode is sponsored by ABS. Together, we are redefining what it means to be a musical community. Rather than a single central studio, our presence is woven into the fabric of our city. You'll find us in boutique practice rooms strategically placed at the heart of the action from Rock City Alston to across from the Symphony in Back Bay. We gather in local pubs, breweries, at local open mics, channeling our resources into getting singers out of the practice room and onto stages in the greater Boston area. Yes, I think well said. And I definitely don't think I know everything or even enough to be standing up there and being like, this is my wisdom. But I will say that what I have found is through teaching, I have learned so much more about my own knowledge because I've had to rethink about it, reapply it, simplify it. And it has been such a powerful tool for me as a person and hopefully for the person in front of me as well. I also want to talk a little bit. So I was watching a few of your performances, and something that struck me is that I'm going to put this in quotes because I don't know how you would refer to it in your own music, but scatting, right? Is that how you would describe it in your own music?
Yeah, definitely. I do some scatting. Yeah.
Absolutely. And scatting is something that I have been on the search for learning because it's one of those types of music that is not really taught in a studio or school setting. It's taught in a outside world setting, a stage setting. Can you talk about a little bit about the journey of learning the things that aren't really taught in the environments that we typically go to?
Right. I think scatting is a lot about relying on the ear. And sometimes you do take ear training in lessons. Sometimes you don't. But this is something you can really develop on your own by listening to a lot of music and trying to repeat what you either by singing or playing. And the more you do it, like anything else, the more you improve that ability, that skill, right? So I think that's even though skating per se is not taught, which you can, right? Because it's part of jazz. It's part of improvisation. You can learn improvisation when you study jazz. But if you want to progress by yourself, you basically can just um, be exposed to a lot of music and try to repeat what you hear, kind of replicate what you hear. Yeah.
Do you think that your instrumental knowledge on the piano or other instruments that you play has influenced the way that you have learned to sing it? Or is it separate for you?
I'm not sure how to answer that, to be
Okay.
honest.
No worries.
Because I'm trying to compare to a situation where, for example, the student did not have any instrumental background, but is able to scat. I cannot find an example.
Okay. Yes, for me, I think it's interesting because I play a few different instruments. Voice is my primary instrument, but I also play piano, guitar, bass to a level where I can accompany myself. Or sometimes I like to say a conversational ability, just like in language. I'm not maybe fluent in it, but I'm conversational in it. And I think that conversational piece is so important for me because when I try to step out of the world where everything is sort of structured and rigid in my singing, not that I was taught that way, but sometimes it gets that way when we have the knowledge because we get stuck in a box, I think. So stepping into an instrument where I can't do that because I just don't have as much practice time on it has been great because as guitar, for instance, I have much more trouble scatting in my voice, even though I'm much more fluent in my voice than I do soloing on the guitar, because I can't think of the notes as fast on the guitar as I can of the feeling in my body when I sing. So that has been a way in for me, but I also know that's a very personal experience.
So do you find that being able to play some of the notes in rhythm, you find them on the instrument? Do you find that that it can refine your singing?
I do because, I have my starting notes on guitar per se or piano where I know this is my one, right? Or this is my home base where I have to return to. And just that simple principle of return to the basics. Always go back to where you started. It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, sometimes when it's not as complicated, it's more accessible to your listener. Allows me to step into a setting where I'm singing and go back to those basics too.
Hmm. I think it's really helpful tool now that you're mentioning, in that you can really ground your singing, because unless you have perfect speech, you sometimes get lost
Yes.
inside the tuning. And so pressing the right key or playing the right string can really ground you in the system you're in.
So I'd love to ask you about your instrument journey. Now, I know you play piano, I know you sing, I know you do it at the same time. How did you decide what your primary focus would be? And also, it seems like a lot of your educational background was more on the theory and composition side. Do you view those as two separate things, or are they an avenue to each other?
I think I just happened to go on the composition path. Throughout the years, I had all these different elements kind of moving in coordination with each other, the singing and the playing, and then formal theory lessons a few years later. And everything was done at the same time with great passion. I just loved integrating all these abilities. At the beginning, when I wanted to integrate them together, so for example, singing while playing my own songs, I found it extremely difficult. Even accompanying, in the right rhythm, playing the chords in the right rhythm along with singing, I found it extremely difficult. That was around maybe middle school or secondary school, what they call in the UK. And it took a lot of practice. It took a lot of practice to be able to do it. So just slowing down and first nailing down the piano part, and then singing and then trying really little by little, section by section, playing and singing together simultaneously. And I think after a while, maybe a year or two, something clicked in my brain, and somehow those things were able to fit together and then become more and more complex later on.
This episode is sponsored by Piano for the Vocalist. Piano for the Vocalist is your ultimate resource for unlocking the skills to self-accompany with confidence. This largely free program is focused on teaching singers to use collaborative piano techniques for vocal performance rather than traditional piano skills, empowering you to accompany yourself with ease. I think you speak to something so important and a question that I always pose to myself and to students who come in, and that is, do you go deep or do you go wide? Do you go deep into an instrument or a concept you're learning, or do you try to do a few things at once in the effort to have more of the fuller scope? I don't know if that was phrased as a question, but what is your take on that?
I like that approach. I like it a lot. And you can experiment in both ways, I think, because you can either try something really complex, but really a small segment so that you can succeed in it. Or you can try a larger segment, but do something a little simpler, right? So depending, I think both approaches can work depending what you're trying to work on.
Yes. And for our listeners who have been listening to the last few episodes, that was Amet's point in episode 1 of having a focus when you sit down to practice is so important, because to Florie's point, you can do both. You can go super deep into a concept, or you could go wide. Maybe you could even do both in one day, depending on how you're breaking down the practice time. But knowing what the intention is, maybe writing it down, as Amet was suggesting, in a practice journal, can yield really strong results.
Yeah, I think that going in a deep kind of a practice or the small specific location is really useful if you're struggling with particular points in the music. But then practicing it in context with what comes before and what comes after is also very important, because leading into this difficult place and moving out of it is a very mental kind of process. And you need to make sure that you're able to process everything in real time.
Absolutely. And I would even make that more macro as well. You can go super deep on an instrument for a while. Go deep into your voice knowledge, go deep into your piano knowledge, go deep into theory, and then make it wide again. How can you incorporate those things together? Maybe have a practice week where you do one day each so that you can see how you're progressing side by side and each one. One struggle for me has been, again, I have a fair bit of voice knowledge, so I can always go deeper into that. But then when I sit on the piano, yes, I can play for myself, but it doesn't always match up. So having that side-by-side comparison of, okay, this is where my voice knowledge is, this is where my piano knowledge is, can I get them to be closer to each other? And maybe they'll not ever be 100% equal, but I think they can get close enough that the listener won't hear it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time today. This has been wonderful. I think we've gotten so much, but I always like to end, if there's one practical thing you could leave our listeners with, what would it be?
One practical thing I could think of is, if you're really, really passionate in achieving something, go for it. But also understand that it takes a lot of dedication and self-discipline. And I think at the end of the day, music or art or any kind of discipline in terms of profession takes a lot of practice. So no matter if you are a painter or if you are a skateboardist, you just need to do something over and over and over again. But be smart and use your time properly. Because if you just practice for 1 hour just for the sake of repeating, that's not going to cut it. You need to be smart how you practice and always keep improving, reflecting on what you do, and try, if you have some goals, trying to achieve them by just listening and refining.
All right. I think that was such great advice. And just to underline that, because I think so important, listen, refine, work smart, not hard. Remember, it's not about the hours you put in, it's about how you put in the hours. And I really love that as just a concrete way of thinking about it. I would like to, again, thank you, Florie, for coming on. To reiterate, this is my favorite kind of podcast, favorite kind of connection here, where it's unexpected and you just learn so much. It happens all the time when I show up to jam sessions and I don't have as much previous knowledge of the person. I come in, I say, whoa, that's so cool. Can you teach me that? And to get to be able to do that on a podcast setting now, I was really enthused by that and enthused by your willingness and joy of just coming on and sharing with us. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Arabella. And I've also learned a lot today. So thank you.
All right, my friends, we will be back for another episode coming up soon. Stay posted. Keep looking at our website and social channels, and we'll be putting out announcements soon.